something for this week. We need to make something this week. Shoot. We need a new board rack. This week, we're making board racks. So, this week's episode, we are going to be looking at building a board rack to help keep your gear organized and off the floor. And we're going to be building this board rack with an old skateboard because we like to use every last bit of the skateboard here at Alchemy. Right here we've got all of the tools that we're going to need to make this board rack laid out for us. We're going to be using a circular saw for our first cut. We've got a jigsaw for some of the smaller cuts, of course a tape measure, a pen for marking our lines, eye protection, a straight edge, some clamps, and a little bit of 2x4. That is everything we are gonna need to turn this old skateboard into a usable board rack for your home. So the first step in making our board rack is we are going to take some measurements. We wanna take this old skateboard and we are gonna find the center of it so that we can rip it in half and make the two sides of our board rack. So we're gonna use our tape measure. This skateboard is an 8.5, so we are looking for 4 1/4 is the dead center of our board, and I'm gonna place a mark by the front trucks and a mark by the back trucks. Now that we've got our board marked, we're gonna take our straight edge and we're gonna line it up on those 2 marks. And since the board is curved, we're gonna go ahead and just use our clamps real quick to tighten our straight edge down to the board. Making sure that we're staying on our lines. This is gonna help us get a clean center line to cut our board in half. Clampy, 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 clampy. Once your straight edge is in place, go ahead and mark that center line. Once you've got the center line on your board, we're gonna go ahead and cut this thing in half. You can use pretty much any cutting tool you have around, a jigsaw, hacksaw, anything that's gonna make a mark through this board. I'm gonna use our circular saw because it's easier and I have one. So go ahead and follow that line and we're gonna cut this skateboard into 2 equal pieces. Now that we've got our skateboard cut into 2 pieces, we're gonna go ahead and flip one and lay it on the other so that the outside edge lines up. And we are gonna go ahead and clamp these 2 halves of the skateboard together so that we don't have to cut each of them individually. This step's important because we want the lines we're cutting in these boards to line up between both sides of the skateboard, and it's a little less work if you cut them both at the same time. Once we've got our 2 pieces clamped together, we're gonna go ahead and template out where the slots for our boards are going to be. And it's important to make sure you give enough space in between each slot, especially if you're putting complete skateboards on. If you put them too close together, you're not gonna be able to fit your boards in. I usually do about 6-inch spacing between our boards, so I'm gonna go ahead and just mark every 6 inches to show me where I want to start putting the slots for these completes. Once we've got our 6-inch spacing, we're gonna go ahead and template out the slots that we're gonna put in for our boards. I've found that it shows boards and holds them a lot nicer if you do this step at an angle. And so we're gonna use this little piece of wood as our template, and I'm gonna set it right over that first slot, and we're gonna just simply trace around this 2x4. And we're gonna do that all the way down our board. One thing we wanna be really careful of when we're templating out the slots for our boards is we don't want them to go all the way back to the edge of the board. If we do that, this whole thing's gonna fall apart. So I usually work to leave about 1.5 inches at the edge of the board because this is where we're gonna mount our back supports, and our slots don't need to be that deep. We just need to set the edge of our skateboard in there. All right, once you've got your templates ready to go, we're gonna use a jigsaw for this part because it's a little bit more maneuverable, and we're gonna work on just following those lines and chopping out those little rectangles that we've templated. Once you've done your diagonal lines, I've found an easier trick for getting through these corners rather than trying to push the jigsaw is we're gonna use a bit that's as wide as our blade and we're gonna put holes in the corner so that we can go back in with our jigsaw and really cleanly attach the two lines. All right, so now we've got all of our diagonal lines and we've punched those small holes in all the corners. So all we have to do now to drop these little areas out is simply play connect the dots. All right, once we've got all the slots cut out, we're gonna take our clamps off and we'll see we now have two exact copies that we're going to attach with some 2x4 supports, and this is the beginning of our board racks. So our next step is to find our 2x4s that we're gonna attach our board racks with. We wanna make sure when we're picking out our 2x4s, we don't want it to be too long or longer than the wheelbase of our board, or our skateboards aren't gonna fit. I recommend anywhere from 10 to 13 inches, depends on what type of boards you ride. If they're shorter, keep it small. If you're making something for longboards, you got a lot more room to play with. But again, we're gonna go with about 12 inches for our 2x4 supports today. Now that our two side walls are all cut and ready to go, we're gonna attach them with our 12-inch 2x4. And we want to just make sure we're lining that 2x4 up somewhere flat. We don't want it spanning the gap of our nose or our tail, and we don't want it to encroach in the areas for our boards. Generally speaking, I like to try to save space right around the bolt holes because I can then use those bolt holes to attach this 2x4. The other thing we want to be aware of as we're mounting our 2x4 brackets is this straight edge that we cut earlier is going to be the side of the rack against the wall. So we want to make sure that our 2x4 support's not sticking out. We want to try to line it up flush with the back end so that our board rack sits nice and flush against our wall. Once we get the 2x4s on one half of our template, we are going to line up the second half of our template and do the same thing. So once we've got our 2x4s holding both sides of our board rack together, we're almost done. The last few things we want to do is get it ready to hang on the wall. So we're going to punch two pilot holes and we're going to go ahead and countersink them so that our screws sit flush. And then we're going to use a little bit of 3M foam to wrap the inside edges to make sure that we're not damaging our boards while we store them on it. So our board rack is put together. We've got our notches for our boards. We've connected them with 2x4s. We've pilot holed and countersunk the holes to mount it to the wall. The last step is completely up to you, but if you want it to be real nice, you can go in with some sandpaper and sand the edges down so that everything's nice and smooth. And what I like to do to finish our boards is I use a little bit of foam from 3M and our spray adhesive. We're gonna cut some thin strips of this foam and glue them to the inside of the rack to help protect our boards while they're on there. These strips of foam should be nice and thin so that they fit just on the inside lip of that rack that we've cut. And again, our 3M Super 66 adhesive spray is gonna help keep them glued to that rack for us. So we're just cutting some long strips and then we can cut them down to fit. Once we've got our foam all cut into small strips, we're gonna go ahead and spray a healthy dose of adhesive on the foam, and we're gonna put a little bit on the board rack for good measure. And we're gonna go ahead and drop that on there, putting some pressure. We're gonna go ahead and glue up all of these and then just trim the excess after. We generally don't need to foam the top rack, we're just looking to foam the bottom lip and the back edge where our board is gonna be sitting. All right, so we've got all of our foam inserts in place to help protect our boards and keep them clean. The only thing left to do is mount it to a wall and see if it works. And there you have it, a board rack for your home, your garage, your skate park, wherever you need it. Don't throw away those old skateboards because there's always something you can do with them. Thanks for following along with us this week as we built our own board rack. And as always, I'd like to point out that these videos are really just a guide. You get to make things you want however you want. So as you're making board racks, play around with paint, change the colors of things, find an old graphic you like and preserve it. Really, the opportunities and options are endless, so get creative, have fun, and if you're making board racks at home, send us a picture. We'd love to see what you guys are doing out there.